Well, let's start off with the introductions. Let's start off with Shayne Smith.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. My name is Shayne Smith. I'm an executive with about 30 years of experience in the engineering consulting industry. About two-thirds of that was spent in a company that grew to about 1,000 people. It was employee-owned. And then about the last third of my career, I worked for a very large global top 10 E&R firm. We were over 10,000 people at the time, operations around the world, and it was publicly traded. I guess the reason why Daniel and I are here today is because I actually met Daniel back in 2007. I was visiting a number of large engineering and construction companies in India, and I came across Daniel's people that were doing an integration with his wrench software. And as I came to understand it, Wrench was everything that my project management and project controls people wanted to see in a system. And I thought it was ideally suited to manage remote collaborators. And I think that's relevant to today's discussion, but it's essentially why Daniel and I are now working together to promote Wrench as a product. Daniel, you founded the company over 20 years ago. You should probably introduce yourself as well.
Yeah, thank you, Shayne. I think when we started building this product 23 years before, we started with the manufacturing industry where we realized that it was inevitable to have collaboration system because design, manufacturing, and assembly works in tandem. And you have large number of subcontractors which are working outside. So when we looked at the same situation in an EPC industry or an engineering company, that was when we realized the necessity that there is an opportunity to bring a lot of efficiency for remote working, multiple organizations working. Especially what I was excited about, even while we implemented our system in Shayne's company, was that Shayne, though you have a large organization, you had lot of offices all over the place, so that everybody could work in their homes. Literally, I think you sort of started up this work from home concept then itself. So it was essential that our tool was could help bring everybody on the same page and get the job done, so which is exactly the scenario we are having today. So it makes a lot of sense, I think, from 2007 onwards till now it's sort of a necessity because we have no choice but to work from home or work remotely or maybe work between multiple organizations. So
right.
The whole idea of we talking about this is from our experience from 2007 onwards till now, and what we have done for various organizations, and I think that is what we want to share in today's, in this white paper which we put together.
Yeah, well, that's interesting that Shayne really was thinking ahead of the time, all the way back in 2007 on this. Now that we're in the COVID crisis, like this really made you guys write this paper. And thinking about the transformation, distribution of industry workforce, like how did that impact this white paper, and how did y'all do that from the work from home motto,
Well, I think, Daniel and I have felt for a long time that the whole engineering industry is kind of ripe for disruption. That the cost structure of the industry is not optimal. The engineering industry hasn't really done what other professional service industries have done in terms of optimize their labor force around the world and use various labor force arbitrage to lower their overall costs. Daniel's right. Back in 2007 and in those earlier years, we had an Indian office. We had offices around the world. We were trying to get people to work together in a more collaborative mode. But I think now COVID has really accelerated a lot of the changes that we're really expecting to see in the engineering industry. Virtually overnight, companies that were 200 people that didn't even think they had the technology were able to send all their people home and still be productive. Companies with tens of thousands of people did the exact same thing. They had, maybe anticipated things from a technology standpoint, but the fact that you can move 10,000, more than 10,000 people and have them working from home in a matter of days or weeks is phenomenal. And I think everyone has surprised themselves by that.
No, you had to though, and they're kind of forced into this. But the weird thing is, a lot of other industries have been doing this for years. And now now it's time for the engineering industry to get into this transformation. Just like looking back at this, what's working and what isn't working. What's your observations on what companies are doing or what they've done in the past compared to other industries that have been doing this for years. There's multiple different industries that are doing this. What are your observations?
Yeah, so one of the major challenges that we saw, because when the companies which Shayne was running, he thought that this is the way to work. So then we started looking at what is that from a technology standpoint we need to provide. So because the most important thing is, an engineering firm is a multidisciplinary organization. You have a large number of people who have to work together to get a project out on time, as well as they need to work collaboratively to make sure that the work gets done, because you have multiple disciplines having to work together. So that's exactly the situation in manufacturing as well. So when we saw that in that situation, you cannot do your job and just throw it across the wall to the next department to look at it. You got to work together. So it's concurrent. You need to work concurrently. You need to work. So today, what happened is, from the time that we've built this technology, most organizations have put in collaboration systems in the first place. Now, you have Zoom, for example. We straight away started working on Zoom and Team and all these things so that people can talk, and then you have tools which are meant for design, where multiple people will design together. So that's got very popular, and that is one of the reasons why, even when the COVID came in and people had to go away and then work from home, they could actually execute the work on the collaboration side. But what you need to understand, that's not the end of the story. Collaboration is just one piece of the whole puzzle, because every person is now working independently but collaboratively. So the tools are there for that. So what we're talking about in this paper, it's just that is not enough, which means you just replaced emails to Zoom meetings, from collaboration on the design platform. But ultimately, you need to look at people, because ultimately people have to be motivated. People need to know what they're supposed to do. We should be able to measure their productivity. We need to also ensure quality, because once the work is done, it moves from one department to another organization, which means it's a client, it is a contractor. So when those things come into picture, you need to have processes, and also ultimately businesses are run for profits. So you need to make sure that you still watch your profit, because if there is a mistake, you need to look at what is the error component in it. Similarly, your cash flows. So we've tried to look at all aspects of this in this paper, so that you are able, as we said, this is the time to actually change, because you have an opportunity, and if you're able to roll this out well, with the right processes, so technology is just one piece of it. You got to even think about how to optimize your resources. In terms of we talked about how people can work in on freelance and other options, which will help you to take your initial cost. And I wanted to specifically talk about an organization which was one of the largest construction companies, which I saw. They said we realized that we cannot handle COVID, because we could not take the risk of COVID, because we suddenly realized that we're vulnerable to the effect of COVID. So which means you have a very large, high cost, which you are having a fixed cost. Now you can't do anything about it. You got to spend that money. But if you are able to reduce that fixed cost to a great extent, then you are probably de-risking yourself even in a pandemic. So we need to look at ways and means of even planning for it and transforming it to be ready to handle even a pandemic tomorrow.
Well, I mean, it's certainly true that companies that are now in a situation where all their people or most of their people are still working from home, and we're months in. So, I mean, there's systems and processes that have now been kind of adopted to make it work. And we know it's not working perfectly. We know people don't want to work from home forever. We know there's a lot of stress building up. We know that there's issues with people working from home. We know that the technology that companies did have going into this was not optimized. And that's, part of what we're talking about. But put it simply, if all your people are remotely connected to the organization, then do you really care where they all are actually physically located, right? And how do you now design your organization looking forward so that you know that a portion of your workforce are going to probably remain in a work from home mode. They're going to prefer that. Part of your workforce is going to return back to the office, but you're not going to need all that office space, I don't think. And as you grow, or as you start to bring people back into your staff base, do they need to be permanent employees? Can they be remote workers? Can they be freelancers? Now that you have all this experience with dealing with people remotely and in their own locations. So I think the optimal staff mix for an engineering firm going forward has to be examined, and that's what we've done in the white paper. We've looked at what does your people mix need to look like? How do you need to deal with some of your the HR issues? The people is the biggest part of the equation. What do your work processes need to look like? What does your technology need to look like? And essentially, what does all this mean to your bottom line? What kind of impact can this have on your profitability and on the resiliency of your company going forward to be able to withstand revenue shocks like a future COVID or the ongoing effects of COVID?
Well, Shayne and Daniel, thanks again for joining us. And we were talking about this white paper you're doing, but can you elaborate? I've read it, but can you elaborate a little bit more? What's the scope of it? What's behind? Why'd y'all actually do this? Maybe Shayne, you can start off.
Yeah, it's white papers are not always something that people want to invest time in because a good white paper with deeper content is kind of a long read, and I think in our situation, Daniel, it's probably a 14 or 15 page read. But in a nutshell, what we were trying to do with the white paper is we're basically saying, look, companies have learned a lot in this in the first few months of COVID. Large percentage of their workforce is working from home, if not 100% of the workforce. And so they've had to move to a remote kind of work environment, which then begs the question, well, what if could these people then be working from anywhere? And could your workforce be more flexibly aligned to your work so that you actually have a larger mix of maybe freelancers or contractors or subcontractors? So we wanted to look at this whole transformation that is now possible. Hopefully that companies are seeing that this transformation is possible, and we wanted to look at it from three different perspectives. We wanted to look at what needs to happen with the people. Especially the people that you're keeping or the people that you're going to be recruiting in the future. What does that people equation look like? What does the work from home contract look like, with people who may want to stay working from home permanently? Secondly, what are your work processes? You've probably already seen the processes that are weak, that were difficult to make happen in a remote environment. So I think there's probably lots of learnings that companies have, and there's probably lots of work and improvements that are now being contemplated by companies in terms of their work process, especially as they're bringing on new people. The realities of today now require that people are bringing new people into their organization, recruiting them remotely, and then plugging them in remotely, never having actually been in their offices or meeting maybe even their key people in person, right? So the definition of the work process and the importance of that, we wanted to focus on that, and the connection that work process has to cash flow. Cash flow is more important than it's ever been, and how do you make sure that your work process is aligned with your ability to monitor cash flows? Lastly, we looked at technology, and we talked about how technology needs to integrate the people and process. What technologies work? What is now possible with technology? What should you be able to expect from a project management system or a collaboration system? What sort of visibility does that system provide? And how is that going to change your relationship with your teams internally? And how's that going to change the relationship with your customer? So then what we wanted to do at the very end was bring all these things together and say, okay, well, if you've actually implemented all this, you've got some new technology, your work processes are established, you've got a more flexible workforce, what does that actually translate to on your bottom line? A lot of CFOs are already looking at physical cost savings, but this goes much beyond that. Some of your costs are going to go up. Your technology costs are going to go up, maybe. Your HR costs are going to go up. But a lot of the costs associated with maintaining a full-time labor force, some of those costs are going down. There's labor savings. There's work from home savings. There is savings to expect with your work efficiencies and your cost of delivery. So we wanted to look at all that. And the bottom line was that for a well-performing company, we actually penciled out almost a doubling of profitability. So that's so not all your costs go away, and we tried to be reasonable and transparent with the analysis, so that you can actually do your own analysis on your own income statement and see what's possible. But I think there always has to be a goal of either increasing your competitiveness, your profitability, or your resiliency, or all three, right?
Now that with COVID, we've already took the first steps on what you talked about, Shayne. Bringing policies and procedures, managing it online, making things more transparent. But how should companies be thinking about rebuilding or their growth workforce as we come out of this? And what are lessons learned that we can use and actually build on, basically how you wrote this white paper and translating that into a company? What are the steps they need to be taking?
So in this white paper, we have actually very clearly articulated what they need to do on a step-by-step basis based on, as I said, from the experience that we had working with so many organizations. So we have also covered a couple of case studies on how companies have done it differently. Like we've talked about a company which is a design firm which provided the option for people to set up independent organizations who knew about the processes of this company, and then slowly give them work where it is 100% work from the parent company to the child company, and slowly tell them that over a period of time, we will only probably be giving you 20% of work, and created a network of smaller entrepreneurs from a parent company. So there are multiple different ways by which companies could change to basically be more resilient in such situations. And we've just not talked about technology, but there is also the experience of how people have done it differently. We've tried to put all that together to gain confidence, so that now that they have made the first step of getting people to work from home and getting people to work remotely, and that can be through, as we said, it could be through contractors, could be freelancers, but processes become important. Then what are the parameters you need to check? So that's where the technology aspect also comes into picture. So technology is not the first thing. So it's not by putting Zoom and collaboration system that you enable your organization to work from home. You need to also make sure that you're profitable, your cash flows are good, you're consistent, and you're repeatable. And you're also working on a continuous improvement mechanism where you have feedback coming in from every project that you do, so that you are able to improve and get more and more competitive. So that as we have actually penciled it down in terms of profitability to say that how can you be more profitable? So this paper was focused on effectively talking from experience to guiding an organization to implement it. It's not theoretical; it's very practical.
Yeah, well, Daniel, can I just say one thing?
Yep.
So Daniel, in this example that you're talking about, where the parent company is basically creating its own network of independent firms to provide services if and when it has the work, I do want to make the point that this isn't a situation where the parent company is taking advantage of freelancers or contractors. There is an advantage to being one of those companies that has been spawned off. The advantage would be that they are now able to work for multiple organizations, multiple clients, just like a work from home person or a freelancer or a contractor is able to work for multiple organizations. That, in my mind, ultimately improves their own job security. You're not just taking advantage of them by paying them only when you've got work. You're enabling them as an extension of your own workforce to provide their services to other customers, thereby increasing their level of resilience. If a particular customer has a work shortage, they're able to go to all their other customers and get more work. So there is a democratization elements in effect here with work from home, in that people can then access different employers. I think that's an important distinction.
Absolutely. Yes.
So, so basically what you're saying is, a lot of projects have slowed down, delayed. So all these companies that have shed the weight, let go of a lot of people, unfortunately, when the projects come back, look at more of a freelancer contract way of doing it and doing it like that, Shayne?
We would say don't hire those people back. Don't rebuild your company in the same way that it was structured before. Take advantage of the fact that you're going to have to rebuild your labor force over the next 6 months or the next 18 months and build your labor pool, configure your labor pool in a different way. And we're suggesting kind of a particular formula for that transformation, but you can come up with your own formulas. And in the same way that we were able to pencil out the savings, you can determine, and any company can determine the impact on itself.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and this is something that you did, back in 2007, but you didn't even have this problem you were facing. You were just trying to bring overall profitability to your company when you were working. What were some of the direct savings that you saw from that? That you can remember about?
Well, in the example where we were developing an Indian office location and building talent in India, my recollection is that the costs of performing work were about a quarter of our North American costs.
Oh, wow.
So what we were able to do, and again, this is a while back. It was much more difficult to transmit large 3D models, project models back and forth. It's much easier now. The cloud environment hadn't even been developed yet. We could still do work at a quarter of the North American costs. And that was quite advantageous, especially for bidding work where we had to figure out our bidding costs. We could do a lot of pre-engineering and then determine, the cost of our bid. There were certain things that we learned to do that became very efficient and effective. And we could literally work around the clock, around the globe, and deliver services to customers at a much lower cost, and even share the cost savings with the customer. So, like I said, we were not successful in scaling that idea back then, but the idea has always been there. And Daniel and I have been friends for a long time, watching the industry fail to develop this hybridized delivery model in a large scale way. And we both believe that the experience of dealing with COVID is going to be kind of a wake up call for people in the industry. Now, I would say if you're somebody who's listening to this saying there's just no way this is going to work in my company, I would say beware, because someone's going to figure out how to make this work. And if we're right, they're going to be able to lower their costs of delivery far below the kind of the historic or traditional method of delivery. We think the engineering industry is ripe for cost disruption, and we know that it's going to be through a different composition of labor force that's brought to projects. So if you can effectively do your projects online in an online environment, in a high quality way, in a visible way, a transparent way, the owner's going to want it, and you're going to be able to do it a lot cheaper than a traditional engineering approach.
And I could also see doing it a lot faster, because the great thing about that, with somebody on the other side of the world working with you, is that you don't stop working.
Right, and a project is always constrained by the resources that you assign to it, and you assign resources because they're the people that you have available, and by extending the availability and the scalability of a talent pool, like many other industries have managed, big projects, large complex projects can be done much more quickly, at a much lower price. I mean, I think everyone knows that. Say a $30 an hour engineer, an engineer who's actually paid that much by their employer, they get charged out by that employer at $90 an hour, or somewhere around there, right? And that's just indicative. That doesn't mean that company's making huge profits. They're probably only lucky if they can make 10% on the work that they're doing. But there's an extreme amount of overhead that has to be paid for by billable labor in the way the consulting industry works, and by changing the composition of the labor force, and by changing the amount of infrastructure that you need to occupy, and all these types of things, the cost structure can be dramatically changed. And we believe we've seen some early movers, some early examples of people that are doing this. We haven't seen it at scale, but we think it's just a matter of time.
Thank you, Shayne. You're basically talking about, freelancing, contracting engineers. And, do you think that's something that all these engineering and architectural companies can adopt, before the end of COVID? I mean, how do you think it would look? I mean, so many other industries have done it. I mean, but why hasn't it been done up until now?
Well, I think engineering companies have always relied on subcontractors and other service providers, contract staff, that sort of thing. But the idea that you're going to leverage freelancers or workers or subcontractors or partners from places that have a lower cost base, right? The one interesting thing that we're starting to see now is they're referring to places as Zoom towns, where people are actually moving out of the city into lower cost jurisdictions because they can work from wherever they're at, right? And they can just literally Zoom conference into work. I don't think in the engineering industry is really taken advantage of developing a workforce that leverages low cost jurisdictions. In the white paper, we use the example of U.S. firms that very few U.S. firms actually leverage a Canadian workforce, for instance, where the costs are arguably 20 or 30% less. If you can't make that work, then of course it's going to be difficult to have people in other places like India or China or Romania or the Philippines or South America, or there's just a lot of places that are cheaper to live in than where a lot of our large engineering companies are located. I'm here in Pasadena. It's not a cheap jurisdiction. California is not cheap, but there's lots of places around the world with capable talent that could just as easily contribute to your company in the way that your staff are right now in a work from home environment.
Yeah, with today's exchange rates, California, Canada is just, it's a humongous spread. What companies out there have already done this, Daniel? Do you know any companies that have already done this?
Well, yeah, many of them. So as I said, most of these organizations have huge number of people across the world in multiple offices. And, as you know, India has been a place where you have English speaking people lots of engineers who have excellent physics and knowledge in mathematics. So they are considered the best for a lot of back-end activity, and that is how the IT industry has, even now I think, the banking, all various industries have exploited that. So to add to what Shayne said, see why engineering industry is probably not taking advantage of that is, we are all used to, there is a lot of things which you share through communication, and that communication is when you meet each other. A lot of it is not really official, while you're having coffee or having discussions, you tend to transfer that. And since you develop the product or the project through that interaction, things get done, and monitoring and all these things happen very, used to happen that way. So it's the fear of, okay, if people are going away, how do you do this? But now you don't have a choice. Now people are away. So then the necessity comes is you need to have a mechanism by people know what they're supposed to do. And as we're talking about, Agile as a very effective tool, which can help people organize themselves. They can have stand-up meetings. They can, work collaboratively on a problem and get it sorted out in a predefined time. So these things can be very easily implemented. Agile has been in the software industry for the last 20 years. It's not yet stepped into, it's not really implemented in the construction industry, or engineering industry. So with these now, you can actually be working very collaboratively. It's not about your task, it's about the objective that you want to achieve. So people start talking to each other as required, and also they take up the jobs, they get it solved. So it's become very practical. So that is why technology has enabled this thing to really happen now. So that is why we have, in this paper, we have really defined the path, what you need to follow to actually execute it based on experience.
Well, if you're looking at, let's say a company really hasn't done this, and they're looking to make a transformation in their workforce. So when times do get rough or anything, they don't have to try to cut a whole bunch of people, or when times go up, they're ready and prepared. But what type of infrastructure do they need to be ready for this, or work towards to start moving in that direction?
So actually, I would say the most important thing, the minute you have your processes aligned, in the organization, and you're plugging in people as required, then you build a scaled up structure. So then you don't have to worry. You can add people, you can use freelancers in case you have shortage, or you could collaborate a joint venture with another company because you get additional work. So the most important thing is if you build your organization on a platform where processes are defined, methodologies are defined, everything is defined on a technological platform, it becomes extremely easy to scale up and scale down as required.
I think that there's something that has to have happened over the last number of months where companies are actually hiring new people into their organization in a complete remote manner. They're having to remotely recruit them, and then these people are never actually going into an office and meeting a group of people. They're not able to spend the first 2 weeks of their job absorbing how that company does work. The company itself is having to describe to these new recruits and these new people who have joined what the process is for getting work done. So, this probably hasn't been accomplished at the scale and at the breadth that it's needing to be sort of contemplated now. So the kind of work process definition and baking that work process into technology that Daniel's talking about, it has to be already happening at some level. I do also want to say something about freelancing because people say, well, it won't work in engineering. But we, in the white paper, we use the example of Upwork.com, which is now the largest online freelancing platform. And if you actually go and check out this platform, you soon learn that there's billions of dollars of project-related transactions that are going on in an environment where people are actually posting their job or their project and then getting a number of people to respond and indicate their interest. And then through that online platform, you're able to recruit, and engineering is an underrepresented skill on that platform, but I think we can all imagine that, over time there's going to be a pool of freelancing talent available, globally, to fulfill the needs of companies, and that they'll be able to interact with that talent in the same way that they're interacting with their work from home resources now. So I think the development of this whole freelancing marketplace, we think needs to be contemplated as part of the transformation that engineering companies can start to plan for.
Yeah, and switch subjects. Like oil and gas, it's going through a big downturn. I'm sure there's tons of different engineers that have been laid off, and I'm sure there's a humongous talent pool just sitting out there that could be easily, recruited as contractor freelancers. That could be easily done. But that's really good. Just to get back to, talk about work process, workflow, visibility, and quality control. Is that something that's definitely required to make this happen as a company? And like, how would a company do that to enforce that? Like Shayne said, bringing in new hires and trying to explain the processes that they have in place, but you're having to do that all remotely. How is that something that you can automate or make done easier?
I think Daniel probably has the best answer here, but I would say that this is probably one of the number one things that CEOs and their leadership teams are worrying about, is that people are seemingly productive. They're all very busy, but what is the quality of the work product that's being developed, given the fact that people can't walk into each other's offices or kind of look over each other's shoulders, check each other's work, that sort of thing, right? So I think, Daniel, you're working with a lot of different companies that have this concern, and they are able to address it through technology solutions and through process solutions, right?
Absolutely. In fact, see, one of the things is, what we see is most people do projects the way they do it, so they don't transform, because engineering industry is very slow at moving. Now, once they put a system in place, then it becomes like a religion. Everybody just follows it. And anybody coming in new, it just gets into the system. They know exactly what to do because the system guides them. So the whole process of how you run your business becomes on a platform which is all defined. And what is the biggest value? See, I come from a background of manufacturing before we started EPC. So in manufacturing, the most successful thing is standardization. And engineering, construction industry has very little standardization. So once you put in a process, then you bring standardization. Then you are able to benchmark. You can compare. You can see how badly did I do the last project. Then you can define, to control. So today the tools are there. Today the systems are there by which you can ensure that you have the right process, you can enforce that process, and then you can monitor that process, and you can have KPIs defined on it, and you can see what is the variation. You can do all sorts of analysis based on the data that is captured on a real-time basis.
So,
But I would say that this is all on online platforms, right? So all the work is being done online. All the work is being done within the cloud environment or within a server environment. There's a possibility now that the work product, the evolution of the work product, can be completely transparent to everybody.
Correct.
Because that manager in Georgia is going to need to see what the work product is from his team that maybe collectively is got folks from Amsterdam or South America or Canada or other parts of the United States, right? So that also means that customers could theoretically be watching as well. They could actually watch the evolution of their work product in real time, and that's a very scary thing. Very scary thing for a lot of engineering companies.
I know.
But I think the customers are starting to recognize that, hey, if all this stuff is going online, if all the meetings are online, I could join the meetings, right? I could join the meetings. I could watch the work my work happening, before my eyes. That's not something that the typical, consulting environment has wanted to share at every turn.
I'll give you an example of a recent project that we did for a Middle East oil and gas company from Abu Dhabi. So since they knew that they were using our platform for execution, they said, "Why do you want to submit the drawings at the end of it or the design at the end of it? Make me part of it while the
Right.
design is being done." So, like Shane said, it was a little intimidating for the design firm, and later they realized that the client was sitting in his office and seeing what's going on. So the number of submissions, the comments, the errors, so it is absolutely concurrent with the client in picture. And right now they're doing it was a $1.6 billion project, and they were able to do it ahead of time because the client was totally plugged in into into the early stage itself. And right now the on a next phase of the project, he said, I also want the contractor to also be part of the collaborations piece with the design engineering company, because the engineering company didn't should be designing something which can be built. So why are we creating them as separate islands and then working together? And these guys are all working from their office in their own space. And with the COVID situation, they are able to see what's going on, and then they give their opinion. So anyway, they would have anyway given the opinions when they put a comment, but why take that seriously? Why not do it parallelly? So it's a major advantage to the owner, because the work gets done and you can probably do it right the first time.
What doing it that way, bringing more transparency, did it reduce a lot of rework? Just like
Absolutely.
bring everybody.
Yeah. Absolutely, that was the whole idea. So what happens is when I'm doing a design, I'm having it there. My contractor sees, he said, "Oh, this cannot be done," or "Why don't you do it this way? We can reduce our cost." And the client says, "Oh, if you're going to help me reduce the cost, why don't you do it in this way?" Because everything cannot be envisaged at the beginning. So when you actually see it as it happens, it can save a lot of rework. And the minute rework is reduced, the cycle time gets reduced. So it becomes concurrent.
Now, we do see this type of innovation. It's quite typical in EPC or EPCM type collaborations where you basically have everyone, working together. But I think the collaborative environment it's often been required to bring people physically together to make these collaborations work, right? People are having to now, develop solutions that are, completely remote for these types of collaborations. So.
We're talking about working remotely, and bring more transparency, and using contractors or freelancers around the world. What kind of cultural barriers do you see that are holding this back? I'm in sales. I see this a lot. From one company not wanting to work with another company from another country. I mean, what do you think that's something that might be holding it back? I mean, from using the freelancer here or there?
I mean, I would say one thing about culture, it differs obviously around the world. There are some cultures that really are more appreciative of a laid out, process, and they're used to being watched at every step of that process and monitored. And I think in the typical North American sense and maybe kind of the Western world sense, there's more of an aversion to that, having a system that's kind of like Big Brother, telling you exactly how to produce the work and watching it at every step of the way, every email that you send, every transmittal, every time that deliverable exchanges hands. So I think there is an aversion to those types of systems. I think people are probably more appreciative of those types of systems given the situation we are in now, where you basically do need those types of systems if you're going to work in a completely remote sense. But I think up to now there's been some cultural aversion to that. I think there's obviously been an aversion to offshoring and the concept of offshoring. So if that is a concept that bothers you, I think whether or not you're working in the UK or in Australia or the US, there are parts of those countries that are much cheaper to live in than a typical urban environment, the city environments. Back to the Zoom town idea I was talking about before. So you could essentially offshore or work with people in low cost environments, even within your own country, if that's something, because there are cultural barriers in terms of working, and bringing teams together from different countries. But honestly, I think a lot of this is going to go away. The more diverse your workforce is, no matter where you're located, the less of an issue this should be. I think the engineering industry itself is a bit behind in terms of its cultural diversity and its ability to blend different cultures into a single work product.
Well, looking all the way back in 2007, Shayne, when you first started doing this with your company way back in the day, what did you see that were the benefits to this, like, on cash flow wise? I mean, or what did nothing held you back? You basically went for it way before something like this pushed you.
Well, I essentially, it was an experiment. We had a number of offices, one in India, and the office in India was one in particular that we were interested in sending work to. And in the instances where we had a project manager and a team that really wanted to make it work, it worked. But as an organizational issue, it was a failure. I couldn't scale it, and I think a lot of companies have failed to scale those types of experiments and attempts. I just think in kind of the COVID or post-COVID world, organizations have come so far in terms of their ability to understand what's required to bring together remote teams that I think it's actually worth looking at again in a much bigger way.
No, some of these companies have very efficiently implemented it, like, companies like Jacobs and, Technip, and all these companies have got massive teams world over because, and they've successfully executed a lot of projects through this. So it's a very successful model.
There's lots of companies that have had thousands of people in an Indian office or in a Chinese office, but I mean, the simple fact exists today that there isn't a large global engineering company that has half its staff on one side of the world and half its staff on the other side of the world, and is able to sort of marshal projects by bringing together the most cost-effective elements of those teams. I think at most, any of the large, top 10 E&R firms might have, 5 or 10% at most of their staff located in low-cost jurisdictions and rely on those jurisdictions to produce a product at a more, on a more cost-effective level. I mean, I literally remember an executive at Deloitte 15 years ago that showed me how Deloitte themselves lowered their average cost of service by, it was more than 30%, by bringing in labor forces from around the world. They were able to their customers lower their average charge rates to their customers and still maintain their same levels of profitability, which, by the way, are usually twice what engineering companies make. So, professional services companies the world over have figured out this model, and I just can't for the life of me understand why the engineering industry can't solve this. And I think the crisis itself is showing companies how they can transform themselves. And what Daniel and I are trying to do is bring together all the elements of that transformation, knowing that we're not just talking about technology, we're talking about process, we're talking about people, and then seeing how that actually pencils out financially.
Shayne, looking at the work from home transition and bringing more visibility with all the cloud-based software platforms that are available out there. What are some of the key benefits that you saw when you did it back in the day with your company?
Well, it's not so much about that. I think in the white paper, what Daniel and I did was we actually looked at the balance sheet or an income statement actually for a $100 million a year firm. And we took it because it would be easy to sort of translate this for anybody. They could just look at it as a percentage of overall cost, because we actually got down to try and enumerate, what the cost benefits were of the type of transformation that we're talking about. In this analysis, we posited that technology costs would go up, and we posited that HR costs would go up because you made maybe more sophistication to manage a remote workforce. But then we looked at the savings from a more flexible composition of workforce. So we assumed that, say, 20% of your workforce going forward will work from home permanently. Another 40%, and this is a lot of studies are indicating that people are wanting to sort of have some office time. So another 40% of the workforce would kind of come and go into the office. But that would obviously physically reduce, the space that you need. The other 40% of your workforce, rather than hiring everybody back and putting them all back in their same chairs or whatever, if you were able to partner with freelancers, partner with subcontractors, maybe rely on people who've been previously employed by your company to be contractors. You have this type of composition of a workforce. What does that relate to in terms of actual labor cost savings? And so we went through a fairly exhaustive analysis. We looked at, an income statement with, 25 or 30 entries, and not all of your costs go down, right? There are costs that go up. But what is the bottom line impact when you do this? What can you expect in terms of cost efficiencies? And when you put all the puts and takes in, what's the bottom line impact?
Well, let's say a company, they already have a good income statement, and is achieving responsible profitability. What benefits would they take from this? That are actually already doing good.
Right. So in our analysis, we didn't assume a company was a turnaround company. We assumed that this fictional $100 million a year company was making 10% profit, which is pretty decent. Yeah. And that it was operating at a fairly high level of efficiency with respect to its overhead costs and things like that. So by implementing the types of changes that we're talking about and kind of penciling through it, we believe that companies that transform themselves in the manner we're talking about could almost double their profitability. We penciled it out to be another additional $8 million in profit for this this one example. And that's a pretty big change. The other thing we looked at was how resilient would a company be if it had a more flexible workforce, and could it react more effectively to revenue shocks? And so we actually did the same analysis by saying, okay, what if revenues drop 40%, as some companies experienced? How quickly can they shed costs? Because a lot of labor costs are fixed, or it costs money to release people. And so in our sort of transformed example, a 40% drop in revenue actually penciled out to a break-even year, whereas in the traditional sense, company would probably be in a loss position at least by $5 or $6 million. So. Again, that was a huge difference, when we looked at it that way. I will say something else that probably is not a very popular opinion, but that there are apparent savings in a work from home situation. Beyond, we did assume some lower cost labor would be accessible through the flexible staffing models that could be employed with the technology. But even just in a simple work from home environment, we believe that there are shared savings that companies could benefit from. People aren't having to spend the money that they would normally spend by going to work, whether or not it be personal grooming or clothing or transportation or food,
laundry.
You add it up, and again, in the white paper we said that for sort of a typical 80K salary, the before tax the after tax savings would be on the order of maybe $700 a month, which is almost 15% of the pre-tax salary. So That's pretty substantial. I think there's savings on the table that have to be now negotiated between an employer and the employee if they're going to work from home permanently.
Yeah, well, when you look at that, also you don't have to have as much office space, but then to counter that, but you're also having to pay for a cloud-based platform, and you have to think about the cost for that. I mean, how does that weigh with going that? I mean, can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'm going to let Daniel talk about costs in a more precise way, but for the analysis that we did, we looked at $1 million a year additional cost for new technology. So basically 1% of the company's revenue going to a technology upgrade. Daniel, I think what you can speak to is the reason why it would probably only be $1 million is that a lot of the software that's now available for these types of applications is subscription-based or use-based software. So it doesn't require a large capital cost outlay. Most software providers now are providing software as a service. And so we were looking at that as a potential kind of $1 million overhead adder. Maybe it could be more than that, but those costs are likely going to be, recouped through the project itself, to some extent.
How big of a company would you say that's several thousand for $1 million?
Daniel, you probably have a perspective on this.
Yeah, I would say there's Eric. What I've seen is, recently we had a customer who has been losing projects because of COVID. Okay, and then they opted to bring the technology because he decided, way before we wrote this paper, and which was also the incentive for us to write this paper, where they realized that they wanted to have the system because they wanted all their senior management to be focusing on business development, and they didn't want to be at the operational stage of the project. Now, once they have a system, once they put it in the system, and people are working from home and remotely, as well as subcontractors engagement, as we suggested, then they get to know what's the status of everything on the cloud, and it's all set up on the cloud, and they're paying on a monthly basis. So the justification that we give them is you would save a cost of 2 project managers. Your cost of 2 project managers would be your cost of technology that you would be probably spending a month once the system is implemented. And you can be rest assured saying that the value that you get is not just about visibility on the project. It helps you track your cash flow, because when you're down in the drain, the cash is king, as we all know. So it's important. You need to look at from a customer standpoint in terms of delivering it to the customer on time. So you have a mechanism to monitor that. You need to make sure that you're optimally utilizing your resources so that you make sure that the productivity is maximized. Third is you also keep looking at your profitability and cash flow. So if you're able to see all that on your fingertips, you actually got all your parameters visible to you of your business, and the COO and the CEO, they are able to focus based on this on chasing for new business, and now with this flexible model of resources also, they wouldn't let go of project if it's there, because the number of projects are going to come, and now as you see now, countries are going to invest in new projects because they have to revive the economy, and at that time, you are ready for it, so you can take up any job, you can just scale up because you have processes, systems, you have mechanism to measure, and you can invest your energy on business development in terms of customer relationships, so that you can gain more business, and you can see all the 4-5 parameters: delivery, quality, your cost, your cash flow, everything right on your fingertips. And for that, what would we pay for that? It's extreme, like Shayne said, even 1% of your revenues it's nothing, for that value that you get out of it.